I'm Corinne Weller. I'm with Team Eland. Welcome to the OhioRAAM show.
Well, thank you, Corinne Weller, for that introduction. We appreciate that. We recorded that about 6 months ago, and since that time, she and Jim Pyatt have done a successful race across the West. She and Dusty Dustin are going to do a two-person female team in the Silver State 508, and she plans to do the race across the West as a solo in 2017. So we wish her well. Quiet, soft-spoken lady until she gets on a bicycle, and then she's something else. Thank you. And this is the OhioRAAM show, show number 128. And we are sponsored by the first two time stations in Ohio, time stations 41 in Oxford, Ohio, time stations 42 in Blanchester, Ohio, these time stations in the race across America. This is being recorded on the 5th of September, just a couple days before we release this show. And by now, many of you will have known the news that one of Ultracycling's best-known names, Danny Chu, had an accident yesterday afternoon. He is in the hospital in Akron. He was riding with another good friend of the OhioRAAM show, an ultracyclist, Cassie Schumacher. And he was not hit. He simply rode off the road. The OhioRAAM show tries to take the point of less is better when it comes to medical information. So we'll just give you these basic facts. He did ride off the road. He was seriously injured. He is in the Akron, Ohio, USA hospital. He had surgery last night. His prognosis is yet to be determined, but those of you who know Danny and everyone wishes him well. The million-mile man. Let's hope we see him back on the bike soon and heading on to those million miles. You can find more information about Danny by going to Cassie Schumacher's website or Facebook page. I'll put that link right below this video on the website so you can stay in touch with what's going on with Danny. So today's show's with Damon Taaffe, who lives in Washington, D.C., who is making his way around the ultracycling circuit. I first spotted him on the list of having done the Sebring 24-hour. I think that's the second or third time he's done it, and he's done very well. Probably do a lot better if he didn't have to earn a living. So we're going to go talk with Damon. Now, my audio is a little scratchy. It seems like every program here of late, it's been somebody's audio, somebody's video, or syncing problems. And that brings me to say that at the end of this show, I'm going to make some comments about the future of the OhioRAAM show. There's a little cloud on the horizon. Hopefully it's not going to amount to anything, but I'm going to make some comments about it at the end of this show. And with that, we're going to head on over to Washington, D.C. and Damon Taaffe. So we're headed over to Alexandria, Virginia to talk with Damon Taaffe. How are you this evening, Damon?
I'm doing okay. Nice to meet you. Nice to be on the show.
Well, glad to have you. I saw your name crop up. I believe it was on the Sebring. Is that not where I spotted you?
I think that's probably right. I've been there. This was my third trip down there. My parents grew up in that area, so they like to go down there to crew for it. It reminds them of childhood, I guess, and watch me go around in circles.
And I see a kitty or something over there in the corner, too.
Yeah, this is my training partner, who is a vicious killer. But she sits and watches me on my trainer.
Just as long as she doesn't get close to those wheels.
Yeah, I think that's right. So
yeah. Okay. Well, Damon, tell us a little about yourself. I saw that you were recently married. You want to tell me about your wife a little bit first?
Sure. That's right. I was married in October of 2015. It was really eventful year last year. I went from having great race results to having a terrible fall, and then right as I was recovering from that, we got engaged, and then it was straight into wedding planning a few months later. And so her name's Amy, and she's great. She's not a cyclist, is the first thing everybody asks me. And people are either kind of disturbed to hear that, or they think, thank goodness. It's just usually one of those two things. But she's probably almost as much into yoga as I am into cycling. And maybe that's healthier on some level for her. But she's as supportive of this odd thing that I do as I think anybody who doesn't do it could be. I think sometimes she doesn't understand the allure of it, which makes sense. I mean, I think before I started doing this thing, I would have thought it was crazy too. But she understands, especially the randonneuring side of things, being out in beautiful places and with a camera and friends and seeing the world that way. I think she struggles a little bit more with the 24-hour racing and what the appeal out of it is. And frankly, there are times in every 24-hour race where I think she has it completely right and I should take up yoga instead. But, it keeps me honest.
Well, Damon, I've said so often, and I think everybody agrees, we're all a little bit nuts, regardless of where we fit into this whole ultracycling picture. Well, Damon, tell me a little about yourself, what you do. I said you do live in Alexandria, Virginia.
Yeah, I'm actually in downtown DC now. I did live in Virginia for almost a decade, but I moved downtown exactly 2 years ago. I met Amy the same week I moved downtown, actually, and she lived a block and a half from me. So that worked out well. But I am in downtown now. And in terms of what I do, you'll be shocked to hear that I'm a lawyer in Washington, D.C. There are a few of us around. And over the years, when I first started getting into cycling, I was a lawyer at a private firm, a small firm. And since then, I've moved to the Justice Department in about 2009. And right now, I'm an assistant U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C. So most people who are assistant U.S. attorneys are federal prosecutors, but I'm in a minority who's not that. And instead, what I do is handle anything that comes in the door where somebody's suing the federal government in Washington, D.C. And so you can imagine that happens quite a lot. So a lot of employment suits, Freedom of Information Act, immigration, challenges to federal statutes, pretty much a generalist job, I think. But it's a notoriously intense job and a time-demanding one. So there are times when I have a trial or a string of depositions, and I'll be working 70 or 80-hour weeks for a couple weeks. And it's difficult sometimes to combine that with the sort of training that I would like to be doing, at least, especially because now that I'm married, when I'm not working, I think my first priority has to be spending time with Amy too. So there are times when that makes it difficult to do the sort of preparation I would like to do. I think with Sebring this year, that showed up a little bit where I couldn't really do any rides more than about 5 hours in preparation for it. And there were a couple of weeks where I couldn't ride at all in January. So I just try to keep it all in perspective. I don't get paid anything to do ultracycling, quite the opposite. And I try to order my priorities right, even though there are times when I think, if I didn't have to do this job for 9 or 10 or 12 hours a day, I could really do some damage out there that it's hard to do right now. But I think it's important to keep everything in life in balance to some extent. I don't know if I would like my life more if I didn't work full time. I think it's part of the challenge of life, and at least my life anyway, is trying to fit all these parts together. And it's always been that way for me. For as long as I've been into endurance sports, and ultracycling is really only something I focused on for the last couple of years. Before that, it was triathlons.
So let's get into your cycling. Tell me a little bit about how you got into it, when you first got into ultracycling, and of course, as I said, we saw you pop up in the Sebring list this year. We'll talk a little bit about how you did there. And
yeah, I got into cycling. I remember back in 2005, I think, I had just had some minor knee surgery. I was getting increasingly injured playing soccer, which is what I grew up doing. And I was an associate at a law firm. working pretty long hours, and I just felt like I needed something new. I hadn't been a runner or a cyclist or any of those things, but at that time, triathlon was not the mainstream endeavor that it is now. It was sort of something you read about in Outside Magazine, and I read about this ridiculous thing called an Ironman, and I thought that sounded delightfully stupid. And so I went out and while I was still recovering from my knee surgery, I read some reviews and bought a bike, my first bike in 20 years, and some running shoes and a DVD that sort of teach yourself to do freestyle swimming DVD. And the first thing I signed up for was an Ironman about a year and a half later. And so I just spent my first summer in 2005, I think it was. I just tried to learn how to ride my bike and what you do. I mean, I knew how to balance on a bike, but I had no idea. I thought, a 15-mile ride was very long at that point. And I joined a touring group in Washington, D.C. There are a lot of them here. And my approach was just to find a ride that was at the outside of my ability and try like heck to hang on to the back of the front pack. And of course I couldn't really ride with them because I was in aero bars and trying to learn how to ride aero bars. And they were road riders who looked at you like a menace if you showed up with those sort of things. But I just flogged myself and kind of fell in love with it in the process. But I remember distinctly that when I got a bike, I tried teaching myself about it because I try to immerse myself in whatever it is I'm doing. And I remember reading an online post where somebody talked about doing a ride in their small ring the whole time. And I had no idea what the small ring was at that point. There are lots of things that look like rings on bicycles, and so I guess I've come a long way since then. And so I did my first year a couple of half Ironmans and a full Ironman, and I did better than I thought that I should have, way better than I expected. And so I thought, well, shoot, if I just train myself to do this without any coaching or anything over the course of a year, then maybe I should stick with it and see how far I can go with it. And I did that pretty much as a part-time job. For the next 7 or 8 years, I raced 9 or 10 Ironman races, and actually founded a local triathlon team in 2012, about the same time as I was getting into ultracycling. And that team is now full mostly of semi-professional or professional triathletes, or way faster than I could ever hope to be. But over the course of the time that I was doing triathlon, I found that the things I really looked forward to doing were the long bike rides. And especially in this area, there are a number of challenge 200Ks, one called the Mountain Mama. Another one is called Mountains of Misery down in Blacksburg, which is exactly what it sounds like. Another one called the Garrett County Grand Fondo Diabolical Double. And these are rides that might have 125 miles of riding, and they might be 15 or 16,000 feet of climbing. And on the East Coast, that means that you're hitting grades of 20 to 30% at times out there. So it's like a circus trick as much as anything else. But I just love those, and that's what I look forward to more than everything else. So in sometime about 2012, I just realized that I was spending tons of time training for these 3 sports, and I didn't really look forward to swimming. Running was okay, but I didn't love it the way I did cycling. And the things I really looked forward to was the long-distance cycling stuff. And a friend introduced me to randonneuring about the same time, so I went out and tried my hand at that. Rode a couple 200Ks, 300K, 400K. And then in 2012, I signed up for a 12-hour time trial up in Saratoga, New York. Did very well there. I was within sight of the overall winner for pretty much the entire day. We both broke the course record, and he finished about 2 miles ahead of me at the end of the day. But it was a terrifically exhausting and fun experience, a little bit insane. And then the following year, I guess 2 years later, I decided to try my hand at Sebring, and again, I had some luck there. I finished second to Chris Hopkinson my first time out, and I knew he was somebody who had made quite a name for himself, so I felt pretty good about that. Yeah, but I've been back the last 3 years, I guess. So this year was my third, and I've done a number of other things as well. I rode a national 24-hour challenge in 2014, I think. Also, I managed 488 miles there. I met Scott Lukert there the first time, and
Okay.
we rode together for the first 12 hours and came through with nearly 270 miles. And so it was just astoundingly difficult how hard we were going. And I thought surely he couldn't keep it up. But after 12 hours, I was just lying on the side of the road by my crew while he took off into the distance. And I also raced Silver State 508 that year.
Oh, okay.
Where I got to have the first of my many honors of being destroyed by Marco.
I was going to say, he's left a lot of damage along the road.
Yeah, but super nice guy. Yeah, so that's kind of been my trajectory. I feel like I'm still trying to figure out this ultracycling thing a little bit, and there's so many variables that you really have to get right, from the equipment. When I went out to Silver State 508, I was on a time trial bike, like I'd ridden my entire triathlon career, and there was about 6 or 7 inches of drop between my saddle and my forearm pads at that point, which was wonderfully aerodynamic, but I just felt like my arms were being torn off in the deserts of Nevada trying to stay in that position. And I had my tires, these skinny things, pumped up to about 120 PSI, and just having my teeth worn down for how much vibration there was going across those roads. And that race also dipped down into the 20s overnight. And so it was hard in every way that it could be. It's just one of the things I love about the sport is that when you finally have a race where you do better than you've ever done before, you've really done something, because there are so many things you have to figure out, so many types of attributes that you have to check successfully, that there's no faking your way through it. You have to really be a student of the sport. And I can't quite claim that I've gotten it all right at this point. I feel like every time I go out there, I learn something else that I shouldn't do the next time, or something that I should bring. But my first year in 2014, when I did 441 miles there, I took second to Chris, and there I stopped with an hour to go because I was just shaking with cold. And Chris was 20 miles ahead of me. The next person was 30 miles behind me or something. And I just couldn't think of a reason in my life to be on my bike at that point. And so I stopped. And last year, 2015, I finally got it all right. I went 475 miles, and I came in fourth, actually, behind Marco and Scott Lukert, who are different types of humans as far as I can tell. And I was trading off with Anders Tesgaard all day. He finally beat me by 5 miles or so, but I did set a new course record there for my age group, which was great. And I hoped this year to set another one, which would require me going 485 or something like that to top what Anders did. And one of the things that's always happened to me in the past at Sebring is I just get blown out the back of that peloton in about the first 100 yards. The Century racers and the 12-hour racers and Hopkinson and Bellow and last year Scott Lukert would take off so fast that it just took me a while to get my legs underneath me. And so this year I was pretty much with Marco and the leaders all the way through the Century point. I rode it half an hour faster than I did last year, which is 2 miles an hour. And I kind of shocking myself. I was thinking, geez, I hope I'm not going to blow up because of this. I felt good. But I remember telling my crew at the Century mark that I was half an hour ahead of where I was last year. And last year I set an age group record. So I thought I had everything going for me. And then I think that, as it turns out, I really didn't go too hard, because I also rode hours 6 to 12 quite a lot faster than I did last year. And I thought I wasn't pushing too hard there. By the time we got onto the racetrack, I was in second place, 7 or 8 miles behind Marco, I think, and maybe 5 or 6 miles ahead of Eric, who was right behind me, Eric Newsom, not sure how you say his last name.
Yeah.
So I just felt great. I thought as if I can just stay on my bike and keep moving forward. I'm 20 miles ahead of where I was last year. This thing is a gimme in terms of doing better than I wanted to do. And I kept it up until about midnight or 1 a.m. My speed was great, 20 or 21 miles an hour. The metaphorical wheels just started falling off. I'm not quite sure exactly why. As far as I can tell, I just didn't have the mileage base that I really needed to have. When you haven't done any rides longer than 5 or 6 hours since the previous summer, and then you're out there at mile 18 or 19 or 20, I started slowing down dramatically, and Eric was whipping past me like he was a different species. And I was thinking, geez, I don't know how he can do that. And I guess that's the speed I had been riding actually up until that point. It's just hard to imagine how you can get there sometimes. And something that's happened to me in a number of ultracycling races is when I start getting tired, it becomes this snowballing effect of, if you don't get the nutrition exactly right, then you can't put out the wattage, which means you can't warm yourself up, which means that you start tightening up. And then it's just this downward spiral that I couldn't get out of. So I forced myself to stay on the bike until about 4 a.m, at which point I was going, my average had been about 21, 22 miles an hour up until that point. And I was having to get out of the saddle and sprint to break 14 or 15 miles an hour. And I found myself getting very mentally fuzzy. I found myself just riding across a field because the road had turned and I hadn't noticed, and tried to do what I could. I hadn't meant to stop at that point, but I needed to do something to kind of arrest the situation. So I went and got in my cruise car for 15 minutes and turned the heat on and just tried to eat. But my body just wasn't responding to it. I eventually, about 20 minutes later, decided to call it a day, and walking the 50 yards to get my bike outside, I was just shaking with cold. And it wasn't that cold, I think, probably 42, 43 degrees. But when your body just starts shutting down like that, you can't warm yourself up. So, I mean, I look at the result now, and I finished with 449 miles, which, taking it in perspective, this year I rode an hour and a half less than I did in 2014, and I went almost 10 miles further. So, I was making terrific time, and the way I think of it is I had a great 18 or 20-hour race. Unfortunately, I was in a 24-hour race, and so the other guys who finished in front of me, by guys, I include Sarah Cooper as an honorable guy because she's stronger than almost any of the guys out there, but I can't beat myself up about it too much. I think, if I could have stayed on my bike for the last 2.5 hours and averaged 11 or 12 miles an hour, then I would have set a new course record. And I think, geez, no matter how tired I am, I could probably do 12 miles an hour. But I just didn't really have it in me at that point. And I'm going to be racing the National 24-Hour Challenge. And I also just signed up for Race Across Oregon, a 24-hour race in Texas last April. I had a truly nasty fall that led to a compound fracture of my left arm and a couple of surgeries. And I was off the bike for a long time at that point. I spent 3 or 4 days in the hospital. And this was my first race back from that. And I found myself this November coming off of wedding planning and a wedding and a honeymoon. I was about 15 pounds heavier than I wanted to be and drastically out of shape. So being able to move from that to what I did in Sebring 2 or 3 months later, I'm very happy with it, truth be told. And I think hopefully if I can keep things moving in that direction, then I can get things done this summer. But got to take it one race at a time, one training day at a time, and try to keep it in perspective as well.
You mentioned a little bit of future plans. What are some of your long range goals or hopes or dreams?
For right now, I'm limiting myself to the 500-mile types of races, and the 24-hour races. Like I said, Race Across Oregon is definitely my target. And looking at the profile of that course with 40,000 feet of climbing and desert temperatures that can be both extremely hot and extremely cold, I think that's a monumental challenge. And if I can do well there and hold it all together, I'll start thinking about what's next after that. I think I could imagine myself doing Race Across the West if I could find a crew to do that. Maybe No Country for Old Men. Again, it's contingent upon crew because I have a couple of friends of mine and we all support each other at this sort of thing. But what goes around comes around, and I really like to crew also. I'm trying to structure things in such a way where not all of my vacation days are spent either training or racing, because I am married and my wife likes doing things like going to Italy and France, and I kind of like those things too. Trying to see what's feasible at the time and doing whatever else I need to do to make sure that my duties are fulfilled and that I'm spending the time that I really need to be spending on the other walks of life as well. People have suggested, and I'm flattered by it, that I try my hand at RAAM at some point. I actually came really close to signing up for 2015 RAM in fall of 2014 after I made it through Silver State fine, and I had good days at Sebring and National 24-Hour Challenge. And the reason I didn't do it was a couple of things. First of all, I just changed jobs to the one that I currently have as an assistant U.S. attorney, and it's really hard. I mean, the thing that I've internalized about looking at the guys who do RAM is that that's what the focus of their life is. And I think it has to be if you want to do well at it. I think I could probably sign up for RAM and get through it on the training I'm doing now if what I wanted to do was finish in 11 to 12 days and just survive the experience. I think I could probably pull that off, assuming I could afford it, which is another challenge. But assuming that I could afford it financially, I think on my current training plan, I could probably get myself through it from beginning to end successfully. My problem is that I'm not really interested in just making it to the end. I don't mean to diminish that for anybody who does that. I think it's an incredible achievement, but I've never been somebody who just wants to go out and make it to the finish line of anything. I would have higher expectations of myself than that, just based on what my other performances have been and what I think I can do. You know, a guy as strong as Marco can wind up in the hospital, you know, and lung infections. Christoph Strasser didn't finish it this past year, and I'm not in their league. You know, so I know that even if you prepare yourself perfectly, that you just can't control these other variables. So the very minimum I would want to do is prepare myself perfectly. And unless I can do that, I have a lot of reluctance about jumping in it. The way my life is structured right now, professionally and personally, unless I could really take pretty much 6 months off and dedicate my life to that, I think it would be a hard thing to do. The way I would want to do it, I'm not sure it would be a responsible thing to do. You know, there's also some angst that I've expressed. I have a blog that I write about endurance sports too, and it's something that I struggle with internally a little bit, that if I signed up for RAM and I got some people out there to crew for it, I enjoy crewing actually personally, and my friends who've done it seem to enjoy it as well. But there's some part of me that feels like asking friends and people who don't know you to follow you along in a van for 10 days or 12 days while you just destroy yourself as a human and are probably nasty to them and everything else. That's something that I'm uncomfortable asking of anybody. I understand that people think it's a great adventure, and I'm sure if I decided to do RAM, I could be convinced that that's something that people actually wanted to do. I'm much more comfortable in some ways looking at something like Transamerica. I could go and be whatever psychological test case I wanted to be on my own time without forcing myself on anybody else. So that's kind of where I look at it, RAM. I think it's wonderful. I would love to do it if my life were shaped in that way, but I have a hard time seeing what I see with the guys who are preparing for RAM and Sebring, and they're there every year. When I was racing this spring, there were four of us who finished the century within a stone's throw of each other. There was Marco, who's Marco, and everybody knows what he does. There was Fabio Silvestri, who's a Brazilian guy who's training for RAM. And then there was Eric, who is also training for RAM. I think he didn't quite make it to the finish line last year, and he's looking shockingly strong this year. And then there was me, and I feel pretty confident in saying that I was not nearly as trained as those guys were at that point. And this is just the beginning of their build toward RAM. And so unless I could dedicate myself to it the way that they're doing and the way I think I need to do, I would never take that step. And so I just have to see the way life takes me. In the meantime, I have to say, in these 24-hour races and in Silver State, there comes a point about 2/3 of the way through where I ask myself, do I wish that I could race for another 10 days at the end of this race? And I think, thank goodness I'm not signed up for RAM, because I don't have to do that. That's great. This is all the challenge that any reasonable person could ever hope for. And I feel like I haven't solved 500-mile races yet. When I did Silver State, I finished in 32 hours or so. I was 5th or 6th. I can't remember. But I just didn't quite get the nutrition right and the clothing right. And as a result, I think I could have done a whole lot better than I did if I did execute those things correctly. And so I think I'm still at that point where I'm extremely challenged and fulfillingly so, just trying to get it right at these shorter races. And Race Across Oregon will really test that, because I think it tests you no matter what you do, from everything I understand. And I'm going to try to get that race this year and hopefully do well there. I think if I can keep building on my current fitness from Sebring and getting in some longer rides and some climbing legs underneath me by then, that maybe I can do some damage, but hopefully not to my elbow this time, hopefully to the leaderboard.
This is one of the things that I get frustrated about, is because I see somebody like you who obviously has got talent and ability, but it is an amateur sport, Damon.
Yeah.
And amateurs have to find ways of making a living.
For me, there are times when if I have to be working an 80-hour week or two in a row and then sleeping and trying to spend time with Amy and that sort of thing, where you just can't make those pieces fit together in a way that would be responsible. That's what the challenge is that I'm working toward. This sport doesn't pay any bills for me, as you point out, quite the opposite. And so we all have to do what we can with it.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you for taking time to be with us here tonight, and we wish you well in your future, Damon.
Thank you.
And it's really good to talk to you and see your passion, and give my best to your wife, will you? And take care of those kitties. That's important too. So,
yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for being with us.
Thank you for spending time with us, Damon. And I think I should tell you that since this was recorded, Damon came in second at the Race Across Oregon. Very good results, and we wish him well in the future. Now, I said I was going to comment a little bit about in the works as far as the future of the OhioRAAM show. As I commented at the front, we've had a lot of problems with Google Hangouts on Air here of late. They're the supporting service that makes this show possible. It seems like it began deteriorating about January of last year. And you'll notice we've had sound difficulties. Maybe it would be with me, maybe with one of the guests. Video difficulties, the same thing. Syncing difficulties. And these are all have to do with that mysterious thing we call the cloud. Now, Google has announced that they're going to close down Hangouts on Air. The video conferencing Hangouts will remain, but the Hangouts on Air feature will end. This means that we're going to have to change our way of doing business. They are offering the similar service on YouTube. This means that we're going to have to do some testing, playing around with this to see how it's going to work for us, how it'll work for our guests. And it means rewriting the tip sheet that we send our guests on how to get on. Fortunately, I have shows recorded in the can that'll take us through most of November. We don't know what the future's going to hold. Hopefully it's all going to work out, but it's all going to be different. But we hope this all works out. You just never know with these services, do you? They come and they go, and we have to adjust accordingly. We want to thank all of you for being such a great part of this show, for helping us with guests, with supporting us in the social media. All you do makes this show possible. And with that, I want to thank all of you. And I believe if everything goes okay, I'll see you in about 10 days. Bye-bye.